I'm about to choke. What if poverty isn't just an economic issue, but a health issue that we've been treating separately for far too long? Hmm. Too much thinking first thing in the morning, Dr. Dorsey. Good morning and welcome to Disrupting Poverty Through Leadership 8 that Delivers Results AM Talk Show. I'm your host, Dr. Tekemia Dorsey, and today we're expanding the conversation in a powerful way. You cannot disrupt poverty without addressing health instability. Hmm. Today's episode is entitled Health, Stability, and Economic Mobility, Integrating Well-Being into Poverty Disruption. Agenda 2030 in Action. Let's connect this to Agenda 2030. The Sustainable Development Goals, SDG, especially SDG 1, no poverty, SDG 3, good health and well being, SDG 8, decent work and economic growth, and SDG 10, reduced inequalities. Let's make one thing clear. Economic mobility is directly tied to health outcomes. But here's the disconnect. We often treat health, employment, and economic systems as separate, not as one, but separate. And that separation limits results. Let's begin by understanding the connection between health and poverty. Now, you may say poverty is one thing and it's not directly related to health, and others would argue the opposite. Health has a direct bearing on poverty, or actually flip. Poverty has a direct bearing on health. Who's right? Who's wrong? Let's ground this theory in reality. Ready? A single mother by the name of Danielle secured a job opportunity. But unfortunately, due to barriers beyond her control, she missed work frequently. Well, you're probably wondering why. Great question. Danielle, unfortunately, has been missing work due to chronic health issues, lack of access to consistent care, and no paid sick leave. Now, let's pause there for a second. Chronic health issues. In today's culture, that's not uncommon. Since COVID, every time we're turning around, there is a new type of variant outbreak scenario that's in front of us. Recently, from my understanding, it's the new type of virus that was contracted on a cruise ship that we hadn't heard about before, but it's here. And I think there are 2 new cases in the US, or several cases in the US, and 2 here in the state of Maryland. Lack of access to consistent care. That's not uncommon because it's very hard to be able to access care be due to a lack of health care, or the network, or not being near a provider. And then the one that is very viral and easily to be related is no pay sick leave. In other words, if you don't show up, you don't get paid unless you're a part of a system such as the school system or the federal government or the state government, where unpaid, unaccrued sick time builds. Then unfortunately, if you don't work, you don't get paid. And unfortunately, with these three variables, these three barriers, Danielle lost her job. Eventually, she lost her job. And the truth is that health stability leads to economic instability. Stability leads to health instability leads to economic instability. And leaders who ignore this connection limit their impact. Three huge gaps, bottom line barrier. And it didn't only impact Danielle, it impacted her job, it impacted retention, it impacted morale, it impacted turnover. All of these things have a direct connection. So poverty is connected to health, and health is connected to poverty. So if health impacts economic mobility, what barriers are we overlooking? Dr. Dorsey, is too early in the morning to be thinking about this? No, it is right on time, because someone right now is listening to this or heading into work, or they're thinking about that Debbie in their organization, or they themselves might be a Debbie. Oh, I'm sorry, a Danielle. And right now they are facing barriers that they're trying to figure out how to maneuver to ensure their bottom line or their life stay on, right? So it's never too early to really think beyond what we see in the four walls in which we live. So again, if health impacts economic mobility, what barriers are we overlooking, right? And because health access is not equal, not for all, not to many, not even for the majority. And the barriers in health access is not always equal because of the barriers that are included, such as a lack of insurance. Right now, we're in a culture that the rich is getting richer, the poor is getting poorer, and the middle class is dropping because of the limitation and the pullback to Obamacare. And unfortunately, Project 2025, that's going to send us back to 3035. And then a big, beautiful bill is not so beautiful, but it is big. And it's having a direct impact on people being able to pay premiums to afford health care, right? So lack of insurance is a barrier. Transportation challenges. Now, transportation challenges are an issue in the inner city, in the rural, in the suburbs, you name it, there's a transportation issue. And as much as some districts and some states are trying to close those gaps and close those barriers, not even for our aging and elderly, and then we're including the aging and the elderly, transportation just continues to be a challenge. No matter how you're looking at it, right? For every solution, there are 5 new problems that pop up. And then other examples of why health access is not equal, another barrier is limited healthcare providers in certain community. And this is not only limited healthcare providers in certain community, it's limited healthcare providers in networks, because networks such as, this, that, and XYZ and Elemental P, their reviews are going down. And so providers are jumping ship. So, limited healthcare providers in certain community, and then limited healthcare providers in networks. And then mental health stigma and access gap. Mental health should in itself be one of those solutions and one of those main topics that should kind of be up there with the importance of education, because mental health is something that it's just a humanity problem and solution, right? And I was having this conversation with someone the other day, and I was just like, prior to COVID, I was just like, all that I used to hear was that mental health this and mental health that, and I was like, people can't be that sick. No, like this is not possible, until I had to really not be ignorant, stop being ignorant, do the research, and have a better understanding of what was meant by mental health. And sure enough, once I understood, got out of my way, did some research, and could relate to what was happening, I could agree. Mental health, and it's not, it was used back then in a very negative light. But mental health is a humanity scenario. People, humans, are dealing with it daily. But instead of people looking at the positive of what mental health offers, and what people are dealing with on a daily basis, mental health is a stigma that is negative, and it causes wider access gaps. Unfortunate, but it's the world we live in. And recently in a conversation, as I was researching some things, I was listening to a person talking about a workforce program where they noticed participants dropping out. And that's not too common in today's society, in today's culture. You know, Everything sounds good theoretically. And then it's the practical application, execution, accountability, and responsibility. And sometimes it's too much. And so, participants do drop out. And then after deeper analysis of, why the participants were dropping out, one of the factors that came out of the data was that there were mental health challenges that participants were dealing with, internal, external, with themselves, with the family, in the community. And, as a result of that, the organization put into place support services to help those participants. And as a result of integrating a solution based off of data and feedback, retention began to increase and dropout for that program, workforce program, decrease. Amazing. I always love to hear about solutions that are not just tangible but are measurable, right? So, being a leader, that is extremely important, because you're going to run into things that are over your head, above your head, that are making you scratch your head. But it's not the problems that come to you, it's the solutions that come out of those problems that help to move the needle forward, in keeping everyone happy, right? And so, access to health is access to opportunity. So that is extremely important. And so, but addressing health requires integration and not isolation, right? And the integration was, kind of like the workforce program that noticed a drop in participants. The data showed it was a mental health challenge. With further feedback and bringing their heads together, they decided to put in support services. Numbers stabilized, retentions increased, and it really again proved that access to health is access to opportunity. And when there's integration and not isolation, everyone wins. Another thing that leaders must keep in mind as they're thinking about disrupting poverty in their communities, in their homes, in their businesses, for themselves, is that leaders must embed health into their economic strategies, because again, poverty impacts health, health impacts poverty. There's no separation, they are linked together. And when leaders begin to embed health into their economic strategies, it's certain things that they should look at, look for, bounce around, have discussion on. What is that, Dr. Dorsey? I am so glad you asked that question. I knew you would get in this conversation so early in the morning. And so one of those things would absolutely include employer provided health benefits. Now, that is automatic. We already know is going to put more of the cost on the organization, less on the individual. But that's why organization and businesses, for profit, nonprofit, and top 500 and top 400 and top whatever exists, right? They're bringing in the big bucks with hopes that they'll be able to work with providers that will be able to provide health benefits that's not going to break the bank for the employer and provide benefits for the employee. So, again, embedding health into economic strategies include that employer provided health benefits. Another thing for leaders to consider is flexible work policies, right? In that also means that the provider you have to go with have to have some flexibility as well, or using more than one provider for health coverage. So flexible work policies could be a win-win. Access to wellness resources, whether it's a gym created on a campus of your organization, whether it's the organization partnering with a health facility like Sinai, Wellbridge, um, they might offer, walking pathways during lunch, mental health breaks in the middle of the day or throughout the day at random, just making it accessible to employees. A plethora of opportunities, having access to online mental health therapists, check-ins if needed. A lot of things come to mind. And then integration of support services. And what I love about this idea is that support services may not be the norm according to what you and I think, but putting out a survey to employees, asking them what it is that they need, and then collecting that data and creating themes would give employers and leaders opportunities to know what type of support their employees need to keep morale up, retention at the forefront, and make everyone happy. Speaking with a colleague working in with a what's considered like a middle-sized company, he introduced or they introduced on-site health services and flexible scheduling. Well, that sounds like a lot, right? That sounds expensive. Maybe, maybe not. But hearing him explain the integration of the on-site health services and flexible scheduling, what impressed him the most and them the most as to why they went this route is that their employee retention improved. Employees were happy, right? And we all know it's very hard to keep employees happy about everything all the time, every shift, right? But these two things, the flexible scheduling and on-site health services, were spot on. And then productivity increased because employees were getting what not only they wanted, but what they needed, right? That was a win-win. And so health is not separate from work. It is foundational to it. And knowing what the foundation of success looks like, from there, it's only trial and error, but building to see where it can go and the olive branch that comes out of that, and being able to keep those employees loyal and returning and referring and being promoted and so on and so forth, right? And mental health plays a critical role in that aspect of everything that we're talking about right now. And so when we think about it, mental health is often overlooked not just in the workplace, not just for leaders, but also in education, also in homes, but deeply connected to economic mobility. Um, a young professional by the name of Andre struggled with anxiety. And, I wouldn't just use the word young professional, even though, Andre is relatively on, the novice side, but, middle age, older, seasoned people struggle with anxiety. But in this case with Andre, um, without support, the employer realized that his performance declined. And when his performance declined, then that performance on the job and that of his teammates around him all unfortunately ran into a roadblock. Um, and because of this setback, unfortunately, in Andrew's case, was struggling with anxiety. His organization introduced some things because they realized that although Andre is a person, quite a few people within an organization was also dealing with some things. So they introduced some mental health resources, that made sense um, to Andre and their employees. They also provided supportive leadership practices, which went a long way. And as a result, yes, it's early, but we're here together. Um, and as a result for Andre, and just like anyone that is dealing with anxiety or anything that can have an impact on performance or just them as an individual, his performance improved. He felt stable. He was coming to work, he was happy, morale went up, teamwork improved. And that's what it's about for leaders that are noticing things with their employees and the culture and environment that they are trying to create versus what's actually happening. Because mental health is not a personal issue. It is a leadership issue. And sometimes it's the leaders and sometimes it's the culture around them. Now, let's pause for a second and step back from the organization and let's talk about community health and systems, right? Because again, they're all connected. And the more that we can ensure that there is a connection versus a disconnect, then we're all winning. So, health communities produce stronger economies. Um, and for that to really happen, leaders must consider access to healthy food, right? Not saying that you have to provide it directly, but definitely access. And for example, like vending machines, most vending machines is filled with diabetes in flavors, in colors, creating healthier choices, making sure that there's a balance, in vending machines at organizations, not just all bad things. So access to healthy food is important. Safe housing is something else that leaders must consider. Man, I'm like kind of late night. um, so again, access to healthy foods, safe housing, um, environmental conditions are things that leaders must consider when they're thinking about healthy communities and stronger economies and community-based health services. That's a lot that's out there. But what I've come to find is that it's not that there's a lack of community-based health services, but there's a lack of knowledge that these community-based health services exist. And if they exist, they are oftentimes too far away from those that need it. So now we get back into the barriers mentioned earlier, such as transportation. You know, um, there was a community invested in local health infrastructure. So this community wanted to do something different in their neighborhood centered around health. Because what they realized in talking with their local entrepreneurs is in organizations in their communities that over time and employment rates increased. And so as a result of the community investing in the local health infrastructure, stability created opportunity. And it created opportunities that everyone could take advantage of. And that was extremely important. But there was cross sector communication that led to cross sector solutions. And that, imagine if that conversation didn't take place, it wasn't there. More problems. And finally, all of this that we talked about must align with global goals. I know you're thinking like global, we trying to figure this out locally. They're all connected, part of that system, right? One, the left impacts the right, and the right impacts the left. And eventually, you come together, you got a whole set of hands. Two as one. So let's go back to Agenda 2030 for a second. Agenda 2030 emphasizes integrated solutions. Health, poverty, and economic mobility are interconnected. And because health, poverty, and economic mobility are interconnected, leaders must align policy, investment, strategy, because strategy must reflect reality, not operate in silo. And if you've been following the podcast for a while, if you've listened to an episode here or there, this is something that you hear me often talk about, right? We can't just think about programs and not think about systems. We cannot just think about what's working in one part in all these different parts where everyone is operating in silo as opposed to working in the system or pipeline with one leading to the other. And because when that happens, no one wins. But when we're operating with a connection and interconnectivity, then everybody involved are winners. So let's bring this into action, because I love what? A leadership challenge. There we are. Let's bring this into action. And here is your leadership challenge. Identify one health-related barrier impacting your workforce or community. One health-related barrier impacting your workforce or community. Got it? Good. Then I want you to integrate one health support strategy into your leadership approach. So you're identifying a health-related barrier impacting your workforce or community. And then you want to integrate one health support strategy into your leadership approach. Take some thinking, some strategizing, and then commit to improving one measurable well-being outcome in 90 days. I think this challenge is a little different than our typical AM morning show leadership challenge, because now we're talking about health. Now we're talking about poverty and health, and we're talking about poverty, health, and economic mobility. So it's really it's going to stretch you a lot, because when most people think of health, they're not thinking about poverty. They're not thinking about community. They're not thinking about owning a job. They're not thinking about mental health. They're not thinking about anybody problems except those that those problems belong to. But as a leader, we got to come outside of that mindset, right? We got to start doing things differently to get better outcomes. Because in today's culture and economic landscape, we employers and leaders cannot afford high turnover, low morale, and low retention. You can't afford it because it costs a lot of money on these platforms to market a job. Then you got to get someone to write up what that looks like. Then you got to go through the hiring process again. You know, it's just a lot of money. When the easier solution is integrating health into poverty disruption to improve economic mobility. Yay, we brought it together. I know, I'm a hoot. Because here's the truth. You cannot disrupt poverty without stabilizing health. You can't. It's going to be a lose-lose somewhere. In leaders that integrate well-being into their strategy, well-being, mental health, are the ones who create sustainable economic mobility. Mic drop. Will drop my phone, but don't want to break it. Well, we did it again. If this episode expanded your perspective, follow Disrupting Poverty Through Leadership That Delivers Results, AM Talk Show, on YouTube for now. Share one way that you are integrating health into your leadership strategy, including your own leaders. Don't just do it for others. Start with yourself, right? And tag a leader who understands that well-being drives results. Drop their name below. Because disrupting poverty requires more than opportunity. It requires stability, health, and leadership that sees the full picture. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you got a lot out of it. As a leader, I hope you were challenged. As an organization or an agency or leader leading this, I hope you're thinking differently about how to integrate health into your current leadership strategy and platform, because it's extremely important. Well, until next time, let me know how your leadership homework, the leadership challenges are going. Drop some comments below. Tag a leader who's doing a great job. And I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Until then, have a great day. Be outstanding. And I'll catch you on the flip side. Be sure to rewind, download, and share, and subscribe to my podcast. Talk to you soon.